Hey everyone, the name is Eric Dorn. In today's video, I talk about how I fell in love with philosophy and how you can too. So before I get into this subject, I want to talk about what happened to me recently. So recently I took an iron bar to the head. When I was dismantling an IKEA furniture, I was working on this side of a desk with these huge iron bars. And I didn't notice that the other one had come loose, so it fell on me and it hit me straight here. I had a major concussion. Like, I noticed issues with language, I noticed issues with dizziness, and I was very tired for a long time as well. And I had a lot of issues with headaches, and I still have some issues with headaches 3 weeks after. So it was quite a heavy blow, right? And they say, knock some sense into yourself, right? And for me, it felt the other way around. I was talking to a Swedish friend of mine, and I was like having issues focusing on what he was saying, and I never really have issues focusing. I'm really good at paying attention to people. But all in all, I thought this was a sign for me that it was time to slow down, to simplify things, and to come back to a more contemplative state of being. And so I'm currently spending some time with my family in northern Sweden, a place where I don't have a lot of friends, I don't know a lot of people, and there's not a lot to do. It's been rainy, it's been gloomy, and so as I do that, I come into contact again with the notion of philosophy, and I'm an avid philosophy reader, and I've been fascinated with philosophy since I was a kid. And I fell in love with philosophy, I think, because in some ways I was a very neglected, lonely kid, right? So growing up, I was, I didn't get a lot of attention from my family, and my dad was mostly away. And so, I found myself craving deeper conversations and connection, and I found it in the world of books. And one book that influenced me a lot was Sophie's World by Norwegian author Justin Gardner. And the book features a girl who kept getting letters in her mailbox with questions that made her think. And these questions were all an introduction into philosophy. So there was some kind of philosophy professor that was creepily stalking an 11-year-old girl and sending her letters about philosophy. Not weird at all, right? But I think she herself found it fascinating. And for her, she was extremely happy for this opportunity to, explore deeper thoughts and questions. And I was fascinated to explore it with her, right? Now, this is a PSA. Don't send creepy letters to girls. Just because you're a philosophy professor doesn't give you the right to, harass strangers you don't know like that. But most of all, what I'm seeing is philosophy continues to be a really important way of thinking and a really important way of growing your mind and your consciousness and your awareness. And I think philosophy has gotten a bit of a bad reputation because of how it's taught in schools. For example, I hated my philosophy lessons. I didn't like my philosophy teacher and how they structured these kinds of assignments, right? Because in one way, they were talking about the ideas and the questions, but they were not talking about the ideas and the questions, right? Not in a way that the philosopher would, right? Because if Socrates was teaching that class, he would not be giving us lectures about different philosophers and their ideas and presenting, the facts around how they came about and what they were thinking about, but he would be asking us questions. He would be engaging in a Socratic dialogue and a dialectic method. And through that, he would be encouraging every student to think about who they are and how they think and what they are thinking about and what, makes them tick, right? And that's what I feel is being missed in education. And it makes sense because education is looking to grade people. You can't grade people's subjective answers and interpretations of their reality and how they feel about things. A philosophy teacher has to, at the end of their semester, hand in an exam and grade you on your ability to retain facts about these philosophers. And so they will ask you to describe these philosophies and these philosophers, but they will not be asking you what you think about these philosophies and these philosophers. And so you'll have to find yourself wondering what the point of learning this was altogether to begin with. Now, what philosophy taught me was how to think for myself. And for me, I was a self-taught kid, right? Because while in school my grades were modest, at least until high school, I was studying a lot on my free time. I was reading a lot of extracurriculars. I was skipping a lot into chapters and into topics that I found really interesting, while at the same time, neglecting my day-to-day homework and things like that. Like, I was fascinated with learning and thinking and exploring different forms of thoughts, and I wrote a lot for myself. And so, philosophy taught me that I can think for myself. I don't need a teacher to tell me what to think. I don't need somebody to, give me the information. I can find it for myself through this process of discussions. And one thing it taught me that I found was very valuable was being my own devil's advocate. So a lot of the time I'll put out a statement and I'll rescind it right after having said it, right? I'll be like, I think this is the case. No, that's impossible. That couldn't be, because then this and this and this, right? I'll note this, after I said it, that no, this must be wrong. This can't be true. this now that I hear it said out loud, I realize, no, this was really stupid, right? And so, for example, I'll talk out loud with myself and I'll record, but I won't necessarily publish it, because this is a very stimulating way for me to train my mind to think in different directions and about different topics. And philosophy teaches me, that instead of seeking certainty and knowledge, I should seek learning, right? So the goal for a lot of people when they seek knowledge is they want to find certainty, they want to find answers. The goal is to, discover the truth once and for all so that they will never ever have to think again. Okay, so philosophy in general is about learning, right? So the general thought of philosophy is to teach you to think. Like, sports and jogging is about teaching you to run and to enjoy athletics and to get more in touch with your body. The idea of philosophy is to teach you to use your mind, right? So that's why we engage in philosophical exercises. Why do we ask ourselves philosophical questions? What's the point of these kinds of discussions? Why do we do it? Well, similarly, why do we jog? Why do we run? Why do we lift weights? Why do we build muscles, right? It's the same question, but it's phrased in a different reality, right? And that's the thing with philosophy. And philosophy has gotten quite a bad reputation because people say that, well, there's no point to these kinds of questions. They're simple mental masturbation. And so similarly, we could argue that, well, there's no point to exercise and physical fitness because that's also physical masturbation, right? Like, in a sense, like what we're talking about here is we're basically depriving people of things that they can find joyful and engaging and stimulating and important and positive simply because we ask ourselves, there's something else we think people should be doing that we think is more valuable, and everyone has their thing that they enjoy doing. And some people have more than one thing that they enjoy doing. Now, for me, my love for philosophy bloomed when I read Sophie's World. Written by Norwegian author Justin Gardner, Sophie's World features a philosophy professor that starts sending creepy letters to a 13-year-old girl. And while I certainly don't encourage people to send letters to 13-year-old girls, I certainly encourage people to stimulate each other to think. So what this philosophy professor did was he really managed to, provoke her by asking her questions like, who are you, right? Like these kind of questions that really get people thinking, wait, who am I? Yeah, I don't know who I am. Like, I'm me, right? Like, I'm Sophie, right? Like, that's the kind of thoughts that could come to a person, right? And that's what a philosopher does. A philosopher allows you to question things that you normally take for granted, because there's lots of things that you probably take for granted, lots of things that you assume to be true, lots of things that you believe are the case, right? Now, for me, like, reading this book was just the start, because it brought me into a world where I realized I was the master of my own education and learning process, right? Because up till that point, I thought, the school system was here to teach me how to think and was here to give me the answers. But what philosophy taught me was, no, you are here to teach yourself to think, through training yourself to engaging with interesting literature, by having interesting conversations with people, by engaging in exercises that get you to increase your consciousness, your awareness, your intelligence. And so philosophy gave me the power, empowered me to start taking control of my own education. And so I started pursuing extracurricular studies. So I started reading about things that wouldn't be graded, wouldn't be taught in a subject, wouldn't be on a test, wouldn't be put in an essay, things that I would have simply for the sake of me wanting to have those things, right? And here's where a lot of people do philosophy wrong. This is why philosophy gets a bad reputation. A lot of people have this idea that, the reason why we seek knowledge is because we seek certainty, right? We want answers that we can produce to use for some specific purpose, right? For career advancement, for the sake of, doing well in a political debate, or for the sake of being able to make financial decisions or things like that, right? So here, knowledge is seen as a tool. Primarily, it's just something you use. Similarly to the only purpose to building muscles is if you plan to lift a lot of heavy weights later on. And if you don't, you shouldn't really be doing any weightlifting, because if you're not planning to lift anything, why are you lifting anything, right? So here, knowledge is simply seen as a means to an end. And you can see this when you start teaching philosophy in schools. Like, a lot of students are taught philosophy in high school and end up hating it, because teachers are forced to grade you on your ability to regurgitate the facts about these philosophers rather than to engage in a philosophical exercise. So a lot of the school system is about asking you questions that they can measure and score and grade you on. So here you have to, for example, take a test where you have to answer all the intimate details about Socrates' philosophies without producing any personal thoughts or explanations or experiences around this topic, because people can't grade your personal answers. People can only grade you based on your ability to remember effectively what other people have said, right? So that's one of the problems of the modern education system. And it is extremely demoralizing because it makes people extremely bored. It makes people feel like, oh, so the only point of knowing this is so I can learn the facts about it so I can put it on the test. And then after that, it's completely worthless and pointless. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? For what purpose am I here, right? And that's a philosophical question in itself, right? So what I found is we have to confront our own arrogance here, in a sense, because I feel people search for knowledge because they seek for certainty, right? So the idea is, if I just think long and hard enough, I'm going to find answers. And after I found answers, I can stop thinking, So that's the idea, right? I have to think a lot because I have to gain knowledge so that one day I don't have to think a lot, right? So that's a common issue. Like, similarly, imagine you were a professional athlete and you said, I have to run until I can run all the way to that marathon. And after I've done that, I never have to run ever again. Right? Like, imagine if you had that kind of a mindset for life in general. I have to learn how to cook so I can make that greatest meal ever. And after that, I'm never going to cook again, right? Like, this kind of thinking is surprisingly common, because a lot of people that go into science, a lot of people that go into and seek knowledge do it because they want to reach certainty, and because they're afraid of the anxiety of not knowing, the uncomfort, the discomfort of not knowing. Similarly to imagine if a runner was like struggling with the discomfort of not being able to run fast enough, right? Or like not having endurance, right? We are struggling because we're seeking certainty. What happens when you seek certainty? Well, you get exactly what you asked for. What ends up happening is people that seek certainty will eventually find something, some truth that they will stick onto like glue. And they will hold on to this, and this will become an unshakable belief, right? So some kind of fundamental building block that you say, that's just how it is, I know this for sure. This is 100% truth. And this kind of thinking breeds a certain level of arrogance, right? Because it means that, whenever you meet somebody who thinks differently, you'll assume that they're ignorant, right? You'll assume that they aren't intelligent enough. They haven't reached certainty. They haven't understood what you know. And because of that, they're engaging in pointless discussions and critical thinking exercises and questions that serve no purpose, because they just haven't realized that you're right? So this is also the phenomenon that leads to people's, intelligence declining later in life, right? Because we treat it as a natural law that people will eventually hit the point where their intelligence will start to drop and their mind will get more and more dull. But there is a reason for why this happens, right? Like, remember that people stop studying typically in their 30s, and you find a work role at work, and then you stick to it, and then you never do anything new, and then you stay within that field until you're 65. Like, that was the reality 50 years ago. Today, questionable. Today, we're forced to keep learning. We're forced to reevaluate, to re-educate, to keep learning. So here what we're ending up in is a world where people assume that, at the age of 25 to 30, you should have formed a healthy base of knowledge and insight into your field, and after that you can stop and now you can focus on applying that knowledge, when in reality what we should be pursuing is lifelong learning. And philosophy can facilitate that lifelong learning. Philosophy can be that thing that keeps you thinking, keeps you wondering, keeps you asking questions, helps you engage in a dialectical method where you have to constantly confront your own opinions and ask yourself, is that really true? Can I really take this for granted? Can I really say this is sure? And while you're certainly welcome to be and feel passionate about what you believe, you can speak passionately about your values, about what you care about, what you think is right, you should never let that passion keep you from at least sometimes sitting and going like, but why do I care about this so much? Why is this so important to me? Why do I want this? Why do I value that? Because these kinds of moments of upheaval teach us to revalidate our thoughts to make sure that they continue to stay accurate over time. Because certainly they might be 50% accurate or 70% accurate, or they might help you in a certain range of situations, or perhaps they helped you in the past, but they don't help you anymore, right? But that's why I think we need philosophy. And so I think one thing we have to remember is, while it can feel uncomfortable to think sometimes, it can also feel really good to think. And similarly to how there's a runner's high, there is a philosopher's high, which is the eureka of insight of, when you hit that mental peak, when you're like thinking at your highest level, when you're really reaching, learning about something really stimulating. And yes, you do have to go through a phase where you're like pushing yourself and you're like challenging yourself and you have to feel some discomfort around that. But more and more philosophy today features embracing discomfort, and this kind of philosophy is becoming increasingly popular because we recognize that discomfort, pain, suffering is a part of life. And pain and suffering is not something that can keep you from experiencing happiness. It's in fact something that is often on the road to happiness. And so suffering and discomfort is possible at the same time as happiness. And sometimes people miss that. They don't realize that, well, it can burn in my muscles when I'm jogging or running. But it also feels great to feel the wind against my hair and to feel the freedom of running really fast, or this kind of experience can happen at the same time. Simultaneously, we can experience these kind of things. And while it's uncomfortable to ask myself this kind of question because it confronts a base reality or fundamental belief that I have, it also feels stimulating and fascinating to be in this process of seeing my thoughts unfold and grow. And I, have to surrender to that experience and allow that to unfold, because I know that it's going to bring me to something new that's going to be equally amazing and passionate. And probably, when you look at philosophers, this level of thinking doesn't really drive people into, eventually becoming cold or depressed or unhappy. No, most philosophers tend to become extremely passionate about what they learn and love to talk about it, love to teach it, love to educate others about it, love to engage in philosophical discussions with other people, and never lose that fascination, that curiosity. And the only thing that will make that happen for you is if you let go of the desire for certainty and truth, and instead treat certainty and truth as a tool and a stepping stone to the next truth, to the next insight, to the next thing you can learn. So instead of seeking knowledge for certainty, seek knowledge for the sake of learning.